So my name is Amar Ayyash. I live right here in the neighborhood in Orland Park. And I say in the neighborhood because I've been to about 12 states in the last 3 weeks. And so it's nice to be home, DuPage County. Thanks, Bob, for thinking of me, and thanks, Robert, for the invitation. Gulls, a closer look at identification. So we're going to go easy on you guys tonight. You've already bared through a lot. We'll start with gulls certainly are a unique group. There is a special subculture in birding associated with gull watching. You're either a gull nut and obsessed over gulls, or you're reserved and you don't really know how you feel about gulls. There's often said there's only two types of birders: birders who can't identify gulls, and birders who lie about being able to identify gulls. So I've written a book on the gulls of North America. It was roughly a 6-year project, and in the book is every gull species recorded in the ABA area, including that gray gull that was last seen in Florida and is now back being seen right outside of Tallahassee. I got obsessed with gulls about 20 years ago, and then I kind of put them on the back burner for a couple years and got back into them about 17, 16 years ago. I think they're a special group. I definitely think they're underdogs in the avian world. They don't get enough love, and it's probably because they don't have attractive voices. They don't have beautiful colors. Some of them feed on our trash. And so some birders certainly feel like the gulls are beneath them. They're just too good to take time to look at gulls. That and the identification challenges that they present, I think, makes them the perfect group of birds to shy away from. But hopefully tonight, I'll have some interesting things, some nuggets you can walk away with, and hopefully think about over the winter as you're outside looking at gulls and ducks and all these other winter birds. So to start with this cover slide here, this is a black-legged kittiwake. This was a bird found at Montrose, hung around for a few months, and actually stayed into March. And it just got so lethargic, it wouldn't fly anymore. And it was just hanging out on the pier, on the fishhook pier. And eventually Larry Cratoulis retrieved it, and this bird ended up dying. And now it's in the Field Museum collection. It's a juvenile bird. It doesn't have, I don't know, it was probably less than a year old in this photo here. The black legs are very telling, the black hind collar. I'm going to try a pointer here and see if that helps. Do you guys see my cursor? Okay, that's good. So that,
Quick, sorry.
please.
Quick enough. If your volume is up, turn it down. Mute it.
Yeah, folks in here can turn the volume down because you can hear me, right?
These.
Awesome. Yeah, so we'll keep it moving here. Black-legged kittiwake is the most abundant gull in the world. There's something like 12 million adults, just adults. This is a true seabird, right? They are pelagic and they only come inland if they're lost or off course. So, yeah, no group of birders or no group of birds. I'll let you read that. So there have been people who've gone off the deep end. They get so much into gulls and eventually there's no turning back or return for them. This is Bill Thompson III who wrote this in jest, kind of kidding around. He wrote a couple essays on gull identification and some fascinating stuff in a book called Identify Yourself. But despite the craziness, we're still out there on the Great Lakes in the winter, freezing cold, looking at gulls. This is the Gull Frolic a couple years back. This was the year Ted Floyd was out there, if you guys remember that year. This is tough birding, folks. This is not easy bird watching, right? It's not May looking in the shrubs for colorful birds. This is, you're freezing, your nose is running. You just want to get back in the car. It's so cold, but it does require some patience, and no patience won't be rewarded with this group of birds. I do want to present you with a challenge. I think gulls, above any other group of birds, are probably the greatest evolutionary success story in the avian world. No group of birds is as resilient, and I'll stand by that. They are equally at home on the water, in the air, on land. Is there another group of birds that is as diversified as gulls as a whole? That's the question. Is there another group of birds that can be found in the muskeg wilderness, in the Arctic, nesting in trees, feeding in landfills, rivers, ag fields, KFC parking lots, out on the ocean? And so they're always watching. They're always there, right? And so if anyone ever asks you what's the easiest way to start watching gulls, the simple answer is go to the beach and drop your lunch. So taxonomically, gulls belong to the family Lyridae. So that's a group of birds that consists of terns, skimmers, the noddies. So it's in that water bird genre. Now, specifically, gulls make up a subfamily or suborder known as Larinae. And among them are 11 genera. And the largest genus is Laris. So Laris are those large white-headed gulls, herring gulls, California gulls, the Icelands. All these others that you see with asterisks here, these are monotypic genera. So Zima is that Sabin's gull we talked about earlier. Hydrocolloius is little gull. All of these have been recorded in North America except for Saunders gull. So we have 10 out of the 11 genera that have been recorded in North America. This large one here with the black back, can we identify that? What is that there? It's our largest gull in the world. Great blackback, yeah. And then this one here is our smallest gull, about the size of a robin. It's little gull, yeah, good. Both of these were photographed at the Field Museum, by the way. So when we approach gulls, you guys, I'm sure know there are two general broad groups, the large white-headed gulls, which belong to Laris, and the smaller tern-like gull, which more birders tend to favor these smaller ones, the cuter ones, if you will. There was a time when both the small gulls and the large gulls were all in the same genus, Laris. So just in about the last 20 years, their phylogenies have become clearer, and the smaller gulls have been put in their own genera. So this is in Massachusetts. This photo belongs to Blair Nikula. Got very lucky to get the largest and smallest gull in the world in one frame. So again, you have small tern-like gulls like Bonapartes and large white-headed gulls like herrings. These Bonapartes and Sabins and black-headed gulls, they mature a lot faster, right? So they only require about 2 years to become adult-like, whereas a herring would require 4 to 5 years. And so this is a nice way to look at gulls. You have 2-cycle, 3-cycle, and 4-cycle gulls. And those in red are our benchmark species. Those we should know really well. The small tern-like gulls, this is the primitive group. So it's thought taxonomically, this is the older, more primitive group of gulls. This Sabin's gull, by the way, 2 of you might recognize out there. This was photographed in September on Lake Michigan. This very same bird here. That was the day, I don't know if you guys heard, we had, was it 7? 8, sorry. I guess it tied or perhaps broke a state record for high count of Sabins. We saw these birds about 12 miles out on Lake Michigan in mid-September. Great month to see Sabins in the interior. And usually when we do see them in the interior, what age are they? Juvenile, yeah. So the adult Sabins have learned a more suitable migration route and they take the ocean. They're very pelagic, like the Jaegers. Here's a tree nesting gull. This is the only gull in the world that consistently prefers to nest in trees. This is just the way they nest. It has eye crescents, a little black head. That's Bonaparte's and a black spruce. This is its nearest relative, the black-headed gull. This is the counterpart to Bonaparte's in the old world. Black-headed gulls are found in Europe, Asia. And just some terminology here. A lot of you might refer to breeding plumage as the alternate plumage and non-breeding plumage as basic plumage. Okay, this is the same individual. This bird that you're seeing on this slide was photographed about 4 months apart in Maryland. So I think the basic plumage I may have had in December, and then I went back to see it like 4 months later in, I want to say April. Same parking lot, Best Buy parking lot in Baltimore. Cute bird. But among these small tern-like gulls are some of the most coveted birds in the world, right? Ross's gull is high on any bird watcher's list. Sabins, ivory. Someone's drawing on my screen here. I don't know who it is, but we'll give you a pass. Knock it off. So interestingly, Sabin's gull and ivory gull are sister species, and they do have something in common. What do Sabin's and ivory gull have in common? Yeah, I'm not sure. We got a little kid out there coloring. It's like, all right, so they have yellow tips to the bill. You notice that? Yeah. So not sure what that's all about, but jokingly, one of the new suggested names for Sabins was sandwich gull. Do you guys get the reference? From sandwich tern with the yellow tip on the bill. At any rate, folks, there's an alternate plumage, breeding plumage Sabins, longest migrating gull in the world. These things get all the way down to South America from the Arctic, all the way down to South Africa from the Arctic. The map that you're seeing here is a map out of a study from about 5 years ago where they fitted Sabins gulls with GPS trackers, and they found this mated pair migrated down opposite oceans. They wintered on opposite continents, regrouped the next breeding season, and nested right feet away from where they were banded. And this was the first example of divergent migratory pathways for a breeding pair of any bird in the world. So Sabins, their migration vies with Arctic terns, and they do quite often hang out with Arctic terns, and they're more tern-like than gulls. All right, now the fun ones. The large white-headed gulls, you'll often call these Laris or just LWHG. These are a lot of fun for us in the winter, especially the Iceland gulls. We're in a fortunate place here on the Western Great Lakes to have thayers and coomlings all at the same time. So these two that you're seeing in the slide here, the one in the back is a herring gull, kind of a medium pale gray, pale eye. But the one in the front there looks like it's slightly paler gray. And the wingtips, that's not the tail there, the black that we're seeing. The wingtips, those are the outer primaries, are kind of slate colored. Do you notice that? And then also there's this white on the underside of the far wing. That's a pretty nice field mark for Iceland gulls. Also has the dark eyes, so we should be able to easily exclude herring gull for this bird in the front. Okay. Typically, if you're looking at a gull flock from a distance, you're not going to easily make out eye color unless you have really good optics. But these wingtips in flight, they're pretty noticeable, and that's usually what we're looking at with these large gulls. All right, let's keep it moving here. Among these Laris species are the blackbacks and white-winged gulls. So lesser blackback, great blackback, slatyback, western gull, kelp gull. Those are our blackback species. And then the white-winged species are Glaucus, Iceland, and there's one more. Glaucus, Iceland, Glaucus winged. Yeah, those are the white-winged species. And even though the Icelands and Glaucus wings have some pigment on the outer wingtip, if you look on the underside of the wingtip, they usually have white, and so we refer to them as white-winged species. These birds have very recently diversified, and it's said that these large white-headed gulls have speciated quicker than probably any other group of birds. And so a lot of their taxonomy is still being worked out. In fact, if you take a glaucus gull in Arctic Canada and an American herring gull in Arctic Canada, they are more closely related to each other than glaucus gull in Europe is to glaucus gull in North America. And it's said much of this is because of recent speciation events and ongoing hybridization. So these large gulls, when they come into contact, they readily hybridize. They have no problem jumping in each other's nests. And so we have these hybrid zones throughout North America. You guys probably know in British Columbia, Washington, Oregon, we have this Western glaucus wing hybrid known as the Olympic gull. It spans from, say, Vancouver Island down to Southern Oregon. And the hybrids there outnumber the parent species, and they're fertile, and they've been hybridizing forever, and they behave as one species, and their DNA is very different. So you'll hear people sometimes say, oh, they should all be one species, but they contradict species concepts. So like if you apply a phylogenetic species concept to them, it's difficult to do that because for some of them, their DNA is so similar, you can't tell them apart by looking at their genes. And then Western gull, glaucus wing gull, different DNA, but they behave as one species according to the biological species concept. They breed, they interbreed, they have fertile offspring. So they're interesting birds. And of course, the hybrids don't make identification any easier. I probably couldn't live on the West Coast. I would have to find another group of birds because almost every time they go out, those folks, they know 90% of the time they're going to be looking at hybrids. Yeah, so we got it pretty good here on the Great Lakes. We don't have tough gulls. I promise you we don't. Kodak grayscale is what we generally use to quantify how dark these gulls are. There's only one gull with a Kodak grayscale value of 0. You guys want to guess which one that is? Ivory. Ivory gulls are only 0. Generally speaking, our gulls span from like 4 to 13. Okay. Our darkest gull is great blackback gull in North America. So in my book, I measured hundreds of specimens from like 20 different collections. I spent about a decade doing this. And I was making sure I had good Kodak grayscale ranges for these gulls. And I only measured adults because the subadults tend to be paler, sometimes darker. But here are 3 examples of 3 different Kodak grayscales. Let's try to identify these. The one in the middle is expected here on the Great Lakes in Illinois. Pale eye, pale gray back, black wingtips. What is this one scoring a 4? It is a herring gull. Pale eye, pink legs, good. But then in the front is a greenish gray yellow leg color, dark eye, medium gray upper parts. This 7.5 we refer to as medium gray. It's slightly smaller than the herring gull, California, right? And that's a prize bird for us. It's a pretty good bird on the Great Lakes. In the back, grayish wingtips, and it is showing some white on the underside. Do you guys see this white here? So that is important field mark when you get these birds perched. You look at the underside here. Dark eyes, smudgy head pattern. You would see this bird in Alaska, Southeast Alaska, British Columbia, throughout the West Coast in the winter. It's a white-winged gull because it has that white on the underside. What is that? It's a glaucous winged. Yeah, it's a glaucous wing. And glaucous wings hybridize probably more than any other gull. They hybridize with western, with herring, with glaucous, with slatyback, with vega. And those are just the ones we know about, folks. Glaucous wing, yeah, they're mutts. Size variation is very evident in this large white-headed gull group. Males tend to be about 20-30% larger than females. Okay, so you take a pair like this in April, May when they're courting or at the nest, and you can pretty readily tell which one's male, which one's female. So if we had to guess here, which one's male? Right side, yeah, it's a ring-billed male type, and on the left there's a female type. Okay. Males are larger than females with these large white-headed gulls. It becomes less notable with the medium gulls and small gulls. So like if you had two Bonapartes at the nest, it would be difficult to know which one's male, which one's female. Those are usually reserved for in-hand measurements. Uh-oh. Yeah. If you're ever in doubt and it's April, May, and these birds are courting, just hang out for a few minutes and you'll quickly figure out which one's male, which one's female. But besides size variation, there's also this element of plumage variation. And this is the fun meat and potatoes of large gull identification. Both of these are first year ring-billed gulls, first cycle ring-bills. Probably born in the same colony. I don't know. They probably hatched from the same nest. They could be. I've seen siblings come out of the same nest and look this variable. So the bill patterns are the same, pink base, black tip, but the one on the right with the white belly has just undergone its first pre-alternate molt quicker than the one on the left. The one on the left still has those juvenile head markings and breast markings, and it still has it molted, those breast feathers and head feathers. But by and large, they're from the same mold. These are juvenile Bonapartes. Notice there's less variation, right? So the smaller the gull, the less variation there's going to be. They all more or less look like the same thing. The larger the gull, like these herring gulls, the more extreme the variation is going to be. So that's a takeaway, folks. Four-year species are longer lived. They take longer to become adult-like, and there's more variation in those earlier plumages. Two-year species, piece of cake. Your Kaufman guide, your Sibley guide, they do a great job describing them. There's no variation. They're all more or less, they look the same. So these are what we refer to as Great Lakes herring gulls. Our herring gulls, this was taken, I believe, in December at the Lake County Fairgrounds. I want to say December or January. But by midwinter, these birds become really worn and faded. But notice the bill patterns. One has an all black bill. One has a bicolored bill. Right? One is paler, one is darker. Both first cycle herring gulls. Okay. Here's a question to think about. Why do these gulls take 4 years or 3 years or 5 years to become adult-like? So you ever think about that? Even with like bald eagles, why aren't they like a Kirtland's warbler? Hatches in June, 10 months later, it's on territory singing as an adult. Why do they require these additional years? I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. There's theories out there for why. Longer lifespan, good. Their life history. These herring gulls will go 30, 40 years. And so they delay breeding. They delay breeding as a form of investment, reproductive investment. Longer lifespan, what's another possible reason? What about their diets? Kirtland's warbler focuses on one or two caterpillars. That's its job. Go find a stack of jack pines and get those caterpillars. That's it. These things have variable diets, right? They're generalists. They're omnivores. They're going to be feeding at a landfill, in cornfields. They're going to be feeding on fish. They're going to be feeding in crabapple trees. Yes, gulls feed on crab apples, Russian olives, and a whole host of other plants. And so having these variable diets requires some experience. And it's not something they can acquire in 10 months. And so they put this off until they gain that experience and are able to breed. They generally breed in colonies where there's fierce competition. And so a 1-year-old is not going to be able to compete with adults that have had some experience protecting a territory and nesting. That's part of the idea. Longer lifespan. You take something like a Bonaparte's, they have quite limited diets compared to something like herring, and they are shorter lived. So Bonaparte's averages from 15 to 20 years. 20 years is on the high end. They are good parents. This is in Gary, Indiana, a herring gull on a nest. They're ground nesters. They generally nest on rocky islands, these little islands around the Great Lakes. Here's what the young look like. They have these cryptic plumages. That's a juvenile ring-billed there. It hasn't even grown its true feathers yet. These are downy feathers, so it hasn't even acquired its juvenile plumage. When they do acquire juvenile plumage, these are herring gulls on Lake Erie, Sandusky. I go there every June and help band a couple hundred chicks. And so here's a question for you all. How many juvenile herring gulls are you seeing? Those cryptic plumages are pretty amazing, aren't they? They fit in so well in the background of where they nest. It's almost like the parents plan it that way. About 8. So there are 3 back here. There's 1, 2, this one 3, 4. So whoever said 8 there, I think you're right. Yeah, there's 4 back there by the tree, but I know we're looking at the ones in the foreground. So gulls are achromatic. They're made up, the adults usually, of just blacks, whites, and grays. They don't have these beautiful colors like warblers and tanagers, but they don't need them. They don't need them. Females and males are both out in the open when they nest. The female doesn't need a cryptic plumage. She's not hiding in a tree somewhere trying to hide from predators. They're colonial breeders. They're both out in the open. One thing that seems to be under selection is their bare parts. So orbital ring, that skin around the eye. The goni spot, this red spot that you're seeing on the bill, is under strong sexual selection. And so there's now like pretty definitive data that males and females inspect each other's orbital rings, their leg color, their bill color, kind of like gannets and albatrosses. They look at these colors and they determine if this is going to be a good mate or not. It's one of the factors. Are you guys able to see those different colors? Yeah. So we use these in ID, and people think I'm crazy when I say this, but we do use these things quite often in identification. So like Vega gull that comes over to the West Coast sometimes has a red orbital ring. When you see red on a herring type, it is very special. Kumlin's Iceland gull, this isn't red. What would you guys call that? Pinkish, raspberry pink, yeah. And that's what we're gonna find in things like slatyback, glaucous winged, and the Iceland gulls. Another thing that is thought to be under selection are the wingtip patterns. These are both slatyback gulls. And the one on the left has extensive white on the wingtip. So there's this idea that as these adults age, they take on more white on the wingtip. And so we might surmise the one on the right is a young adult because it has a lot of black in the wingtip. And the one on the left might be an older adult. Do you guys find that fascinating? That these wingtips can be actual fingerprints telling conspecifics. I have this badge. Look at my flashy wingtip. So there was a study done over a course of 30 years in Europe on common gulls. Common gull is like our ring-billed gull in Europe. And they banded about 700 birds and they tracked them for 30 years in the colonies. They go in there and they measured these mirrors. These white spots right here, folks, are called mirrors. And they measured these mirrors and they found they got larger as the bird aged. And as they got closer and closer to the end of their reproductive life, the mirrors started to get smaller each subsequent year. Yeah, so they got bigger as they reached their prime. And then after that, just a few years before they died, those mirrors started to get smaller again. The Europeans, gotta love it. Yeah, they are very serious about studying the most minuscule details on gulls, and they banned a lot of gulls in Europe. So it's thought that probably up to 10% of their gulls are banded. But anyway, slaty-back gull is a great treat for us on the Great Lakes. One of the identifying features of this species, obviously beside the slaty black back, the trailing edge here, see this white? Yeah, it's quite broad and thick and it follows onto the inner primaries. And then they have this flashy string of pearls here. All these white spots you see here are called tongue tips. It's pretty flashy. But let's go on to a quiz of some sort. There's three of these that you should really know. For our region, if you're from Illinois or even the Eastern United States, you should know 2A. What is 2A? Ring build. 2A is ring build. Very good. You should also know 2B, that small gull, tern-like gull. That's Bonaparte's. Excellent. Maybe I'll throw in a trick question now. How about 4? No, 3A. If you've been paying attention, you know which four-year gull this is. 3A. Our most common large four-year, it's our herring gull. Yeah. So it gets tougher, right? With these Laris species. I mean, I almost started to say 4C for herring gull, but that's a glaucus. 4C is a glaucus. A pretty small build glaucus, by the way. Anybody dying to know what one of those is? You know 1A because you've seen it in a different slide today. It has a pink orbital. It's in Iceland. 1A is Kumleen's Iceland. Good. It's the East Canadian subspecies of Iceland gull. Short-billed gulls in there, formerly known as mew gull, has a big bug eye, small bill, not too much black on the bill, just a dusky band. 4A. 4A is short-billed gull. Yeah. All right, can we do slaty-back gull? Has a fierce look, kind of a mascara look around the eye. Ooh, this is getting crazy now, isn't it? What if I told you 1B was slaty-back? You'd probably believe me. So what's 3B then? Has a lot of lipstick on. 3B has a big gony spot. That's pretty classic of lesser blackback gull. I think it was Kevin Carlson who once said, I can identify 90% of birds just by looking at their head. I don't need anything else, just the head and bill. I don't know about that, but 3C. What do you think of 3C? It's Bonaparte's closest relative from the old world. Black-headed. Yeah. All right, we'll leave that. Let's leave this. Pink in gulls. How are we doing on time, Mr. Perez? Yeah. How much time you guys got left? About 3 hours left in you? I'm just kidding. I'm not gonna hold you hostage here. You just if you want to yell at me and give me my signal. I didn't want this to be all identification because I didn't want you guys walking out of here bad mouthing me. I know it could be hard doing a full ID talk. These are best reserved for workshops. So I do 1 hour, 2 hour, 3 hour workshops just on gull identification. I got a few in Ohio this winter and British Columbia. So I wanted to mix this up a little bit of natural history and life history. You've seen some pink in gulls like Franklin's and Ross's. You ever wonder about where's this pink coming from? Is it the same pink as flamingos? Is it the same pink that we see on like salmon? Yeah. Birds get these pinks, reds, yellows, oranges from feeding on carotenoids, right? It's a colorant that you can only get through your diet. And so Franklin's gull is one of these gulls that metabolizes these things greatly. And the pink is seen more often in Franklin's and Ross's than any other gull. In fact, the scientific name for Ross's is rosea. And it's said that its future English name should be rosy gull. So you know about these name changes that are going to take place in the next few years. Ross's will be one of those that we lose, and they're trying their best to keep the 4-letter, what do they call them, codes, the banding codes. They're trying their best to keep them the same if they could. That's a priority. So Ross's gull might be rosy gull. Bonaparte's might be boreal gull because of their tree nesting habits. So that'd be nice if we can preserve those 4-letter codes. But so these birds, they eat these carotenoids and they do a great job of metabolizing them. Ringbills do this as well. I don't know, it's a little more subtle, but you'll see them especially in 2 places in North America. The Eastern Great Lakes, like Buffalo, Erie, Pennsylvania, they get a lot of pink ringbills, Niagara River, and also in like Washington State. The ones out west, they feed on salmon. They go into these salmon farms, and the farmers feed the salmon carotenoids to get the salmon to look pink because it's more attractive to the consumer. But the birds end up in these salmon farms. They eat the carotenoids and they get pink out west. Out east, they feed on crab apples. Yeah, Buffalo, New York, you could see hundreds of ringbills feeding in crabapple stacks. At any rate, a big takeaway is gull identification has to be done in stages. It has to be done with some patience. You begin with adults if you're just starting. You have to know your most common species, and they're best grouped into age groups: 2-cycle, 3-cycle, 4-cycle gulls, or small, medium, large is another way to look at them. If you had these 3 on a beach somewhere in Illinois or in the East, let's start with the big one: pale eye, pink legs, herring. All right, medium size, mustard yellow legs, ring-billed, good. We don't even have to see the bill. And then the small one here with reddish legs, that's Bonaparte's. Yeah. And these are our 3 most common gulls: small, medium, large. They're fun, completely different lifestyles. There it is. It's official. All right. There aren't a lot of diagnostic field marks with the large gulls, but there are some diagnostic field marks with the smaller gulls. Do you guys see that black underwing? What is that diagnostic for? That's little gull, yeah. Boy, we see that, we get excited, right? No other gull has a black underwing like that. But that field mark is an age-related field mark, right? Because it's not found in the first-year little gulls. There is a first-year little gull in here, and it doesn't have the black underwing like the adults. Where is the first-year little gull? By the way, this is a flock of Bonapartes, and there's only 2 little gulls in here. Let's zoom in. How about if we say this: 4 birds left of the adult little gull? Let's count. 1, 2, 3, 4. You see some differences? Like what would be something you'd look at? And don't say bill because boy, that's subjective at that distance. The gray underwing, yeah. So these Bonapartes have like this white flash on the outer primaries. And then little gull has this grayish black on the outer wing. Yeah. Do you guys see that pink flush to these birds? There is a pink flush on all their bellies. It's subtle. It's better in overcast conditions. You can see it better under cloudy skies. The bright light tends to wash that away, but there's been about 17 gull species recorded with this pink coloration, terns too, all the time. The 2-year birds, not too bad, except for these M patterns. They all more or less look the same. B is Bonaparte's. Okay, let's go with that. That's our benchmark species. It has a black trailing edge from the body all the way to the wingtip. This is Bonaparte's. White headlights here at the wrist. What are the other ones? What's A? It's a smaller bird, has that Hitler mustache for a tail band. That's boy, it has a really thick carpal bar. What is this here across the wing? This is called the carpal bar or the wing bar here. So kittiwake has a really broad black hind collar and it has an all white trailing edge. Okay, check that out. Yeah. Again, kittiwake has white all across the trailing edge. Little gull is variable with its black here. Sometimes it has more black, sometimes it has just a little bit of black on the trailing edge. But kittiwake's always going to be white here. And unfortunately, most times when we see these birds, we see them in flight at a distance, or they're sitting on a lake somewhere half a mile out. Right, so getting familiar with their wing pattern is really important for these birds. Little gull, I would say, is probably equally rare to black-legged kittiwake. I don't know, you guys can probably correct me on that. What's more rare in Illinois, kittiwake or little gull? Little gull? Okay. Fun birds. They are pirates. They do chase each other. They chase other birds. This is a Bonaparte's on the left, a little bit bigger, chasing a little gull. Notice the little gull's carpal bar, really broad, thick carpal bar. And then Bonaparte's has that complete black trailing edge. This is in Manitowoc, I want to say, June. Good place to see little gulls in the summer. Sheboygan, Manitowoc. Follow those eBird reports. When you see 200, 300, 400 Bonapartes being reported, there's got to be 1 or 2 little gulls in there. So that's usually my cue when people start reporting a couple hundred Bonapartes. You go in there, if you have a day to spare, find some little gulls, possibly a black-headed gull. Quiz. Black trailing edge all across that wing. Bonaparte's good. They do keep a tail band for the first year of life. No trailing edge. Thick black hind collar. That is a kittiwake, yeah. And so you might notice the leg color there isn't black. And about 1 out of 20 of those young kittiwakes don't have black legs. They have brownish yellow legs. About 1 out of 20 young kittiwakes don't have black legs. So the hind collar there is enough and the white trailing edge is enough. Oh boy, this is becoming a bit much. Where you have to memorize this. There's a quiz going to be mailed out to all of you. So eventually, if you get farther with this group of birds, you'll have to learn these feather tracks, and they're very helpful, not just for gulls, for all birds, right? Just to know generally where are the greater coverts, where are the tertials, the scapulars. This is a juvenile lesser blackback gull. It has a whitish vent and a pretty distinct white tail base. So this is the tail base here. I can see that white fading in. It's not all dark, but they generally tend to be more solid brown with nice, crisp, pale edging when they're fresh. Okay. On the open wing, this is what those feather tracks look like. And this is true for raptors, for all our birds. There's shingles that stack up on each other and cover the bases to the flight feathers. The flight feathers are the primaries and the secondaries. How many primaries do most birds have? Let's go 10. Okay. And the innermost primary, here we go, we're getting technical, is called P1. It's a good name for it, right? And we number them outwardly until we get to P10, right? So when you hear gull nuts talking about P5, P6, P8, they're usually talking about these feathers on the outer wing where all the pigment is. And that's where all the magic happens, say from P5 out to P10. But the secondaries, it could vary from species to species. So like our smaller gulls, Bonaparte's little gull, they may have like 16 secondaries. Our larger gulls, herrings and such, have like 20, 23 secondaries. It just varies. A little quiz for you folks. Number 9, what feather group is that? It sits over the back, starts with an S. Those are the scapulars. Those are usually the first feathers to be replaced. 1, what is that group? Primaries, right? There's 10 of those. 4, the secondaries. And right next to the secondaries, number 8, the tertials. They're tertiary, okay? 5 are the greater coverts. 6, median coverts. 7, lesser coverts. Now 2, those are coverts for the primaries. What should we call those? Primary coverts. Yeah. And then 3 is a bonus. The what? The alula. Good. It's like the rudder, kind of like a thumb. You'll see birds, especially raptors and gulls and bigger birds, when they want to, like, I don't know, stop or churn on a dime, they usually pop out that rudder, that alula. Oh boy. Yeah, that's called a mess. That's a classic mess. So one of the most understudied aspects of birds is molt, right? We know a lot about migration. We know a lot about breeding. We know a lot about voice. But molt is one of those subjects that's been put off by a lot of folks, even people who've been birding for 30, 40, 50 years. If you ask them, what happens in April, May of this second year broad-winged hawk, what molt is it undergoing? What feather track gets replaced first? This doesn't really change how we identify a lot of group of birds, especially the smaller passerines, but it is important with gulls. Molt does have implications for ID. I stole this from Skater Die. I thought it was neat because a bird can forego breeding, right? They take sabbaticals all the time. A bird can decide not to migrate. You'll get like a Western tanager in somebody's yard in Rockford. If it finds a good food supply, that'll hold it for the winter. They don't necessarily have to migrate, but if birds don't molt, they will die. That's a fact, right? Like every year, an annual molt has to occur. And if they don't, they become flightless. They can't insulate their bodies. Parasites overtake them. Predators easily grab them. So molt or die is a real thing. There's 2 primary, I don't want to use that word, 2 main molts. Don't use primary in a gull talk. 2 main molts. There's the pre-basic molt and the pre-alternate molt. The pre-basic molt is the complete molt that birds undergo right around the breeding season, right? As they're nesting, finishing up nesting. And that pre-basic molt finishes up usually by late fall. So this is a lesser blackback. On the left there is in New Jersey, Cape May. It is in high molt. Do you see those new inner primaries? We can actually number these. That's one of the fascinating things about watching gulls. They're out in the open. Binoculars will easily show you these things. This is the first primary. What should we call that? P1, this one, P2, P3, P4, and then P5, the tip is showing there, that black tip. So we already know this bird is halfway through its primary molt. And so when it completes all that primary molt, all the other feather tracks will more or less have replaced itself. So the primaries are usually the gauge used to monitor these molts. And when those primaries are all fully grown, we can be pretty sure that pre-basic molt is just about complete, done. And so when that molt is done, it's in basic plumage. The individual on the right could be said to be in basic plumage or non-breeding plumage. The pre-alternate molt is what you guys would think of as like breeding. It's molting into breeding plumage, alternate plumage. Mirrors, just a few vocabulary words here, and then you can highlight these in your gull book. I'm not being too obvious, am I? All right. So you've heard this word mirrors. It's almost exclusive for gulls. We don't use it with any other group of birds. This is a mirror on the 10th primary of this ringbill, this white spot. This is a mirror. Okay. You don't see these mirrors when these birds are perched. So this ringbill here, these white spots are not mirrors. Okay. They're the very tips of these primaries. That's what you're seeing. And these are called apicals or apicals, okay? You don't see these mirrors because they're concealed on that folded wing. Which primary is the longest? That's some trivia there. You got to ask that next time. Is it P9 or P10 that's longest? It varies from species to species. Okay, but generally P9 is a little bit shorter than P10. The top bird has no mirrors. That's a laughing gull, by the way. The middle bird has one mirror. That's a herring gull. The bottom bird, how many mirrors does it have? Two. Yeah, it has one on P10 and it has one on P9. And this is a Thayer's gull, by the way. This is a Thayer's gull. How do we know it's a Thayer's gull? They just tend to have less black on these webs here. They tend to have less black. It's a pretty well-marked Thayer's. There's nicer looking Thayer's than this one. But this is really the crux of large gull ID. These wingtip patterns, once you get into the weeds, you start comparing segments of feathers on these outer primaries. And then windows, I think we'll end with windows if you guys are all right with that. What are windows? You've probably heard this at like a hawk watch. They do use this with raptors sometimes. So the bird on the left doesn't have a window, but the bird on the right does. The one on the left is lesser blackback, and the one on the right is American herring. Where am I looking to see the window? Yeah, it's the inner primaries right in this neighborhood here. You see this pale swath of feathers? That's a contrasting pale window. Lesser blackback generally doesn't show that. California gull in their first year, they don't really show windows, but the herring gulls generally do. The Iceland gulls do. It's a neat field mark. You'll hear people talking about windows on these younger birds, but also compare their tail patterns. Which one has more white on the base of the tail? The lesser blackback has more white on the base of the tail. And it seems to show a pretty defined tail band. Whereas most American herrings, I'm going to qualify that, have a dark tail base. Okay. Lessers also generally seem to show whiter heads, more contrasting white heads. This is a neat age group to get familiar with. It's fun when you pick out your first cycle lesser blackback, and they're out there, guys. They are out there with the herring flocks. Oh, neat. Hooded gulls. You guys know your hooded gulls? I know you do. One of these migrates straight through the interior, goes to South America. It's named after somebody, starts with an F. This is Franklin's on the left here. And then what's the other one? Laughing. These are each other's closest relatives. Franklin's will always have that demarcated hood. It has that half hood pattern, even as a first year bird. Broader eye crescents, right? Overall, it's a neater looking bird month for month. But what do you notice about the tail bands? Laughing has a dark tail band all the way to the base. Franklin's generally shows white outer tail feathers, right? And a neater tail band. Cool. Fun. All we got to do now is get out there and find some gulls. Perfect time of year to do it. If you're in the area, some suggested places you can go for gulls without getting robbed or your car broken into. The Lake County Fairgrounds used to be great, and now it's just hit or miss. Lake County Fairgrounds in Libertyville, Grays Lake, it's adjacent to a landfill, and the birds come in off the landfill and just put down in a parking lot. It's better early in the season, like now. And then after December, for some reason, either raptors are harassing them or security there is just like running them out of the parking lot. Lake County Fairgrounds, North Point Marina at Winthrop Harbor. Lake Calumet, the Calumet River is good. But south of here, Will County, if you guys are familiar with the Arsenal Road ponds. Yeah, there was a slatey back there a few years back. That's still a good place. You can't go on Sundays, it's closed. You'd have to be looking from behind a fence. So go on a weekday or go on a Saturday. Right next to a landfill, similar situation. Birds come in off the landfill, they put down on these ponds, pretty close. A nice variety of Iceland sometimes. Where else? Who else has a good gull hotspot that we can steal? Nobody. Well, you're in good company. These things are usually temporary. Like I've had good gull spots, and then they only last for a few years, and something happens, like a landfill closes or a bald eagle sets up shop and the birds just move, they go somewhere else. And that's one thing you can count on, the gulls move. And so do the breeding colonies. So you'll have a breeding colony here one year, and then a landfill closes and they're no longer there, like overnight. I've seen it all over the country. So they move. When the food moves, they move. Raptor comes in. If it's enough of a threat, they leave. Yeah. All right. So I think I'll close with that, guys. Thank you so much for your patience. I hope you get out and find some good gulls this winter. And even in spring can be great because you get this collision of migrants and breeders at the same time. So thank you.